we hope that you are as well as comfortable to ask questions and share reactions and commentary in the chat. So just get us started on Facebook. Okay. So we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Palestine Monday series. Thank you for joining us today. I know that folks are really busy. There's a lot going on, but this is a very important and necessary and timely conversation, a conversation that PAC has been committed to having every November, especially during this time or this week of what is called Thanksgiving, to help us debunk Thanksgiving, be critical of it, especially as a Palestinian, a community center that advocates for and represents Palestinians. We understand what it means for history to be skewed and for real history to be erased and for communities to be affected by settler colonialism. So we want to take this time also to honor the indigenous communities of the Solon land that we are on right now. I personally am coming in, I'm personally in Clifton right now, which is Lenape land. We want to just take a moment to pay our respects to the elders of those communities, specifically who are, whose land we are on right now. And again, for folks who might not know the indigenous name of the land they're on, I put a link in the chat for you all to be able to find it. And if there are any other resources or links or better ways for folks to find that, please, whoever is on, share them. Cool, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have two amazing speakers and people that are here today for this conversation, and I want to get right into it. Just so you all know, I have some questions prepared for our speakers. So this is going to be more of a moderated conversation, but please feel free to keep questions and comments put questions and comments in the chat at any time. And I'm going to be mindful of time, be mindful of all of your questions. So I am going to make sure whether you're on Facebook or on Zoom, we get to the questions that you have. For those of you on Zoom, please feel free to react using the reactions on Zoom or put comments in the chat, and I'll try to get to all of them. And it just helps generate a really great conversation. Great. So that is enough from me. It is my pleasure to introduce our two panelists that we're going to have a conversation with today. I'd like to first introduce Dimitris Johnson, who is Dine from a community near Ganado, Arizona, named Tolani. I hope I pronounced that right. Please correct me. Dimitris began community organizing shortly after being elected as president of Kiva Club around the disastrous gold ping mine spill that affected his people in 2015. He is also a longstanding lead organizer for the Red Nation. And then I would also like to introduce Kylie Guy, who is a citizen of the Navajo Nation, and she is a member of the Red Nation and program director of Red Media Press. So thank you both for being here today and for giving us your time. I'm going to start us off, I guess, with the first question. If you can just briefly introduce yourself and anything you would like to share with us about you, your work, and specifically the Red Nation. And whoever wants to start us off.
You know what? I'll do it. Dimitris Johnson Dashijane, Twitchini Nishle, Hado Sitna Jini Bashichin. Sanjikin Ada Shichela, Twitchini Ada Chanela, Twithlana Denasha, Ado Akut Ego Denehestin Nishle. What up, everyone? My name is Dimitris. You can call me D, though. Everyone calls me D, so D's fine. And you actually, honestly, Tolani is actually like a place. I feel like that's like how people, it's like one of those things like where, I don't know, it's like an indigenous name, but then people try to say it and like it's like the way it's spelled, right? But it's Twithlane. But yeah, geez Louise. Well, first of all, thank you PAC for allowing us to speak. We're honored here at Red Nation. I'm honored as just like an indigenous person and just sharing space with all of y'all talking about Palestine, because It was when I first started joining the Red Nation. Actually, even before I joined the Red Nation, I was in a student organization, Native student organization at the University of New Mexico called Kiva Club. But Kiva Club had like a relationship with some of the other student organizations. And gosh, I totally forgot. I apologize. The student organization that we had a relationship with it's slipping my mind. But I think you know, that was actually the first time I learned about Palestine or heard about Palestine was actually in college. And, you know, like it would be like every weekend or every week or like every Friday, I think it was, in 2014, I would see people out there on the street. There's like I don't know, like our major student crosswalk or whatever. But there'd be, you know, people lined up holding Palestinian flags, and people talking about the BDS campaign and what is BDS. And that's how that was kind of like my introduction into Palestine. But it wasn't until like I actually joined the Red Nation and I had like dedicated comrades that, you know, were just not only militant, but just like highly just like principled and educated on like what Palestine is. And through organizing and through just like relationship building with within, you know, our politics or like within the Red Nation, I was able to grasp like a better understanding. But in 2018, wow, 2018, I was actually nominated by my peers, my comrades in the Red Nation, to go on a Indigenous youth delegation put on by the Palestinian Youth Movement, to send Indigenous youth from Turtle Island and also in Hawaii and some you know, just to go to Palestine, to go on this delegation to Palestine. It wasn't for me, like I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Like I mean I knew, but like I didn't know like how much it would impact me. And also understanding like, okay, so if I'm going as like an Indigenous person, if I'm going as like a relative, if I'm going as someone who you know has dedicated their life to also to like the liberation of Indigenous people, I have to understand like, you know, what it is like I have to take away. And being there was like a 2-week delegation with other Indigenous youth, you know, some water protectors, some land defenders, and just a rambunctious group of Indigenous people who actually haven't really gone outside of their own like reservations or their own islands or like their own homelands. And learning about colonialism, learning about like displacement, learning about apartheid, and just like the ongoing settler violence that in a way like it resonated in such a way, like I felt like I didn't even leave home. Once I landed in Palestine, it was like, whoa, like I'm out here at Burnside Junction right by the Burger King, just because like there was like not only like the land just felt familiar, but the way people interacted. And like that's something like I like to this day like is like very personal to me. Like yes, like we both like suffer under like settler colonialism, capitalism, like imperialism, all these things. But what I also took away is like the relationship, like that, like you know, I got anteed up, like people, you know, these Palestinian aunties like fed me, welcomed me into their homes. And like that's something that is also just like very like culturally and like socially indicative of like Indigenous people too, of our people, me and Kylie's people, just like making sure everyone's fed, making sure everyone has a home, like kind of roasting you in a way, but also just like but like very caring. But yeah, I just give a lot of like, you know, what I learned about Palestine, not only and the opportunity to like the Palestinian youth movement, and through that like relationship building with other Palestinian organizations, and to continue that fight, really understanding like every day that we live under like, you know, this settler colonial state. It is tough. It's in a way like it is like normalized, but at the end of the day, like building those relationships and standing in solidarity with each other and continue to pressure our own people, and talk about me and Kylie's people, to resist like Zionism, resist like these settler colonial states. And it's tough work. And like that's like also the work that Red Nation is committed to just waking them the heck up. But I feel like I talked long enough. I'll let you go, Kylie.
Thanks, Dee. I'm sorry, well, could you repeat the question? It was like briefly introduce yourself and the work that we do.
Yeah, anything you want to share with us about work you do or the Red Nation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so my name is Kylie. I have been a member of the Red Nation since 2018. And I think it was like required for new members to study and learn about Palestine and the struggle for like liberation. So that was my introduction to Palestine and the history of like struggle, which was very just like, I mean, like I had no problems like understanding, because it's like because it's so similar, right? It's so similar, like our fight for dignity and our fight for land. And I want to say in 2019 for Red Nation's Native Liberation Conference, we had Dee and I participated in a delegation. It was like a solidarity delegation, and we took, you know, a group of people either from Palestine to Navajo Nation and the Northern Pueblos, and there was just like, you know, a lot of like knowledge sharing and a lot of like connections that we made as well. And just it was definitely an honor to bring that group to our homelands. And then that I think it was shortly after that I went to Palestine on a delegation with Mecca, Middle East Children's Alliance. And we were there for a week, and pretty similar to Dee, you know, when I got there, I was just like, whoa, I feel like I'm on the res. Like, I don't like, it just felt like familiar, very familiar. And I think the only difference was that, you know, here in the US, like settler colonialism is very like sneaky. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you miss it. But in Palestine, it's very like visceral. There's no like, there is no like attempt to hide the oppression or the violence. Yeah, it's just very visceral. And I think, like, despite that, though, there was also just like, I mean, I don't want to romanticize it or anything, but there was also just like a really strong like culture of resistance there that I had like quickly identified as well. And that is what made, I guess that's like what kind of like, I don't know, like lit a fire like in my belly, I guess, where I was just like, oh my God, like they're totally like unafraid to, you know, like call soldiers like settlers to their face. And there's like these grandmas out there who will just, you know, come out into the street and just, you know, continue to tell the truth. protect children, protect their homes. And yeah, so those were some of the things that I had that I guess like really stuck with me. And I try to kind of like I try to like, I don't know, like bring some of that energy here and in the work that I do with Red Nation and Red Media, especially just having that uncompromising commitment to truth. So that's Red Nation. And with Red Media, I'm the program director of Red Media. So Red Media was formed in 2020, kind of like during the pandemic. And basically Red Media serves as like the media arm of Red Nation. And we center Indigenous storytelling, Indigenous like intellectual traditions, and we tell our stories on our own terms rather than having it told by, you know, through the settler perspective. Yeah. And I mean, we're still fairly new, and Red Media is you know, working on some things. So hopefully next year we will have like a book program that I'm developing, in which we want to get, you know, political like themed books or just like Native books in general to like Native schools, Native libraries, community centers, youth centers, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing a little bit about yourselves and your work. I'm excited to keep an eye on what comes with Red Media. Also, you both already kind of touched on some of the next question I was going to ask. So I kind of actually want to shift our order since you both brought up, you know, your trips to Palestine and how, you know, just what you experienced, and you shared some of the similarities that you saw. So I'm wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit more on the, you know, the similarities or differences that you realized taking place on the ground in Palestine and on the ground here in settler United States. And then maybe also to go off of that, did you identify any similar mechanisms or tools of settler colonialism that both Israel and the United States use? So it's kind of two questions, but, you know, we could bring them both together.
Well, man, I will say, like, right off the bat, like, you know, Palestinians are very courageous and brave people. Y'all resist like settler colonialism and just like Zionism, just like you resist settlers pretty hard. And that's something like Kylie touched on, and like that is also like what lit a fire in me too, is like seeing like how, I don't know, just intensely or just like passionately or just like every day, like just being about the work, just being about like your people, having like that love. I think that's what it is like that love for your people, and also for freedom, for liberation. Like that is like what I took away from Palestine. And coming back here, like, I mean, I love my people. I fiercely love my people, but also like with that love too is like, you know, there has to be like that accountability, and like seeing like our people, Diné people, have like it's like a growing like more intimate relationship with the state of Israel, or like, you know, so-called Israel. Like that's disgusting. And you know, like it was our previous president, well, previous president now. I saw, it was like, when was it? It was like 2014, 2012, somewhere around there. But I was Navajo Nation president, Ben Shelley, went to an event that, you know, openly supported Zionism, that was sponsored by, you know, these Zionist churches that are scattered all across the Navajo Nation. And the church invited the president of the Navajo Nation, And, you know, the president openly endorsed like the support of Israel. And that tradition of like, you know, like Zionist support, it like support for Israel is very, I don't know, it's like normalized within like our native elite, or those that have like power within our nation. Our now previous president, Jonathan Nez, it was like in 2019 or 2020. No, it was definitely 2019. He made his way to so-called Israel, and took his I don't know what you would call it, his journey to the river of Jordan, and got baptized there. And like that, I mean, he's an openly like evangelical Christian Navajo guy. And even like after like, you know, calls of like not like, don't support this, like don't go out there, he still went out there. And, you know, he held up a flag. Like even his vice president also like holding up flags, going to these galas, going to these dinners supported by these Navajo Zionist churches. Like that's just kind of just, you know, normalized. And like I don't know, like it's hard to blame our people. It's hard to really like, it's like an understanding. It's like, okay, there is like some individual choice, but also like it's just kind of like the structures. It's like the system working like how it's supposed to, like settler colonialism, or even like it's like purposeful on like what like you know, Israel's doing to you know, there's a term out there called red washing, like supporting indigenous people here in the United States to kind of, you know, erase the fact that they're also, you know, actively genociding Palestinian people and stealing their land. So it's like you're trying to gain support from other indigenous people to say like, hey, I'm one of y'all, like we're indigenous too. Meanwhile, like you're actually killing indigenous people. So those things are, you know, things that we also like actively understand, but also it's like we have to actively hold our people accountable too. So that's like kind of like the thing that we're also dealing with is like, it's just like a lack of education, like just what we're force fed here, like within our education, the US education systems here. And just like not only the erasure of like our own histories and like other indigenous people of Turtle Island's histories, but also histories of indigenous people worldwide. That includes Palestinians. So, you know, it's just like a constant like our gosh dang people, but also it's just like these gosh dang settlers. And like it's yeah. Yeah, I'll stop there. Go ahead, Kylie.
Thanks, Dee, for talking about all of those difficult topics. But yeah, so I think you know, similar mechanisms that so-called Israel and the United States use are erasure, you know, like the retelling of history, like through their perspectives. I also think that like, you know, like sharing similar like ideologies and propaganda, sort of like victimizing themselves, or like you know, like framing themselves as like victorious, you know, like they came to these lands and they developed it and they made like something out of nothing, which isn't true, because there were, you know, existing governance systems and like systems of relationality that were determined by Indigenous people, and, you know, Indigenous people were living in and they just came to replace it. And I also too think that like there's something else that's kind, I don't know if it would be like quite similar between like Israel and the US, but this sort of notion of like legitimizing their, well, I guess it's more so with Israel, but like legitimizing their like indigeneity to the land, when that's like not true. And then in the US, you know, you'll have like settlers who will say that they had, you know, their like ancestors, or, you know, they had been living on the land for like generations and generations, you know? And so it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's just lies, like the audacity. And I think in terms of like resistance, that's similar. Between, I think that was your question too, was like, what do we see similarities and resistance like on the ground? I think for all the time that, you know, Indigenous people in Turtle Island and Palestinians, for like for the entirety of like occupation of our homelands, we've been resisting. And that's either through like continuation of our languages, of our stories, of you know, just always like creating spaces like this to tell the truth, and to call out, you know, to call out settlers, you know, and there has been like, you know, the intifadas, and here we had like the Red Power movement, and I think, you know, now what is like growing ever more is land back. And I think it's just like so hopeful to make these connections, and to sort of like, you know, keep like using that language of like land back, and you know, because it encompasses so many different things, right? Like land back, it encompasses you know, like it could encompass like the right of return, or the continuation of our like governance systems, or protecting our children and our elderly, and our women and the land and, you know, animals, like water. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. I don't know, I kind of like rambled a bit, but that's all.
No, that was great. And there's a lot. I want to unpack more, but I'm going to come back to land back and right of return, because I actually think it's really important for us to delve a little deeper into, because I, you know, personally, I see it as a shared goal, like that, like what is our end goal? And I think that's important. That is our end goal, because sometimes, you know, things get, trying to find the word, become diluted politically, and so it's an important reminder that is always, you know, that was the end goal, and that always will be the end goal. As you both were talking, I was thinking about how, you know, I've always understood Israel and the United States to have like a parent-child relationship, and like more recently I've also been thinking of them as basically each other, right? Like Israel is the United States, the United States is Israel, and it kind of helps contextualize and make a lot of sense of some of the mechanisms you both identified, right? Retelling education to make it more of a brainwashing propaganda to fit the, you know, manifest destiny rhetoric that both of them have and use, and then also through education systems, and that it you know, we were seeing a lot more a lot more fear-mongering tactics from Israel too, especially for Palestinian advocates in the US. You know, if you critique with the new IRA definition, for example, if you critique.
Oh no.
Sorry.
Wow.
I don't know what happened. Sorry, y'all, I am back. Let me just reclaim post. Okay, so to get to my question, you know, I think I got cut off for talking about IRA definition, right? Naming anyone that critiques Israel as anti-Semitic, and how that is really a fear mongering is actually, we could get into that. It's another conversation, but you all made me think of education and propaganda. And so I want to take us, if you all don't mind, into our efforts to recreate educational spaces that tell true history, like you all said, from lived experiences and communities' narratives. If you all can just take us through the real history behind, quote, Thanksgiving, and use this as a space to share that and to honor the reality and the lived experiences of what is celebrated. And I use quotes on purpose, especially in the next week.
I can give a quick little timeline and then you can just fill in, okay. So all right, so between 1492 and 1619, disease and violence brought by European settlers killed 90% of indigenous populations. In 1620, the Pilgrims departed on the Mayflower and they founded Plymouth Plantation. And I believe it's often told that the first Thanksgiving happened in 1621, but that is a lie. The first Thanksgiving actually happened in 1637, and it was declared by the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, William Bradford, to commemorate a massacre of 700 Pequot women, children, and men. And I think, one of the great lies of Thanksgiving is that, the Pilgrims arrived and they were welcomed, everybody was like friends. They engaged in this very peaceful meal. They broke bread and everybody understood each other, and indigenous people kind of just faded back into the background, or that they were perfect, they were okay with just whether they were okay with just giving their land away, which is not true, because the massacre pretty much was part of a war, but that was instigated between the Pilgrims and the indigenous people surrounding the area. And so what I also think with Thanksgiving too, it's also framed as sort of peaceful, but it has this whole history of genocide, whole history of murder. And I think that it's important to know that the Pilgrims did not come here with the intention of living peacefully with indigenous people. They did not come to live, respectfully within indigenous governance systems or their systems of relationality. They came to replace it. And Thanksgiving is a commemoration of murder. It's a commemoration of genocide. Dee, do you have anything you want to add?
Holy guacamole, that was a bar, Kylie. That was a bar. All right. Well, Louise. Well, okay. So Thanksgiving. I grew up in public schools here in the United States, right? In the so-called United States. And it's always around this time, right? It's almost it's approaching before we get our fall break or whatever we call it. But you're just a kid in elementary school, or I don't know how primary school, whatever. And you're making hand turkeys. You're making you're doodling in your coloring book, and that's when you first see a cornucopia and turkeys and fruits and whatever, right? Oh cool, I already know this upcoming weekend I'm be hanging out with the cousins, eating some turkey at grandma's place. And that, and what comes with that too, in the school setting is these plays on the first Thanksgiving, right? I was like, some students are gonna play the Pilgrims, some students are gonna play the Indians, and like everyone's just gonna be peaceful, like everyone's just breaking bread, everyone's having fun, and like that's just like so ingrained, like has been for the longest time, like in like the US school system. And even on our even like on our own schools on the res, like those kinds of, I don't know, like the propaganda, if you want to call it that, like just, oh, just like the wrong ass history. But what I've been able to see in my lifetime, and like just, with them, I want to say like the past 5, 6, 7 years, maybe a little bit longer, but like this narrative shift changing from like calling it Thanksgiving to like thanks taking, or like no thanks, no giving, or like, I don't know, I'm a use a Nick Estes' word, our comrade, like no thanks, land back, like it's it's really cool. And like that only happens because of like our people, like indigenous people, holding that line, holding our history, like sharing that knowledge of like, like this is the actual history that we hold. And even like when I was sharing, like, me, little D, little 6-year-old, 8-year-old D, like making hand turkeys, like my parents, my dad specifically, like let me know, like, hey, like don't do you not, like that's not the right, that's not the right way, or like that's not how we're taught. Like don't do things like that. Like don't call us Indians, or like don't, just eat the food, just pretty much, like that's not the way. And like how he learned and how my parents learned were also like from other Native people at that time, because it wasn't like normalized at all. And seeing like that narrative shift, or like even seeing us like seeing like this, kind of like this mass consciousness, or like mass like relearning of like, okay, well, it's not Thanksgiving. And I know y'all know, like, I remember I was there, Gandalf, when like people started calling it like no thanks, no giving, or thanks taking. People were like, oh my gosh, it's like a social justice issue. Like all these like woke people just trying to ruin our holidays. It's like, okay, first of all, yes. But second of all, like this is like things that indigenous people like had to struggle for. This is things like indigenous people, like through all like the settler colonial nonsense, like the bullshit, the violence that we had to endure, from like not even trying to learn our language, not even trying to pass down these stories, like literally getting re-educated, killed, relocated off our lands, all these things, to still keep that knowledge and hold true. Like this is the contradiction that this country is built on, and all your holidays are bullshit. And like that is something that indigenous people are doing today. And even right now, when we're talking about, I know we're going to get into land back, but talking about land back too, and like for indigenous people, because it's an indigenous centered movement. It started from indigenous people. I mean, the word land back is like kind of like a relatively new, like cool word, but the work of land back has been going on since like settlers came on this continent, And so for us to define like what land back is, or for us to like re-educate people on like what Thanksgiving is, that is like from the work of indigenous people. And like, I don't know, we also say this in the Red Deal too, which is um kind of like it's a political program that the Red Nation developed from like indigenous people, talking about like, okay, so world's dying, we're here at this point, people, our people, Palestinian people, indigenous people all across the world are dying. We're the ones that like have these knowledges to actually save this world. Homelessness, like these pandemics, everything, wildfires, it's all happening, right? The solution is just to listen to indigenous people and like let us lead. Like, gosh dang it, like, and here we are again, talking about things taking, and it really is just like from listening to indigenous people, right? Like it's just like this, listen to indigenous people. And we make it pretty simple, even, yeah, I don't know, but I'm gonna ramble, but I just like to end it with that. Just just listening to just people, we got it, right? Like, we know, seeing our first ball game, this is like our fourth world, right, Kylie? Like, we got it.
Yeah, I wanna name on that, like, so much of just reading from Indigenous scholars and talking to Indigenous communities has helped me like articulate things related to Palestine because of so many similarities, and just like we didn't grow up with the words and the tools to be able to like confidently articulate what we are talking about. And so I do want to name and honor the Indigenous knowledge that also helps us as people advocating for Palestine have the confidence and the words to do so. I want to, there's so much I want to talk about. I think a way to transition us into unpacking land back and right of return, I do want to make space for you all to share. I guess I'm going to combine two parts of this, like some of the, you've talked about the reservations, and so some of the conditions on reservations or of reservations that Indigenous people were pushed into. Is there, just because I think this is something that people don't talk about enough or often, is there fair political, cultural, social, or economic representation? And, what are some of the main issues or struggles that Indigenous groups or communities are organizing around right now? And then maybe that could be how we transition into talking about land back. And I don't want to homogenize all Indigenous communities, of course, right? Because not all Palestinian communities are the same. So if you want to do it just from your personal, spaces.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm a little hesitant because I currently do not live on the reservation. I'm calling in from Tewa Territory, Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is a border town. But I grew up on the res, so I can kind of like speak to what it was like while I was living there. So like, yeah, as a child growing up on the res, I was there from I think I was there until I was about 16, and then my family, we moved off res and into Phoenix, Arizona, which is another border town. But on the res, there was, like some of my family members, they don't have access to running water. My grandparents didn't get electricity until I was much older. And there are, families who live in similar conditions. They also live in a rural part of the res, so they face like horrible road conditions as well. A lot of families kind of live along like dirt roads, or of course there's like paved roads like in the bigger like towns, I guess. Yeah, and so I guess like, but despite like all of those conditions, there's also just like a really strong like sense of community. So while I was living on the res, like, I had access to like cultural traditions, language. We also, learned about weaving. We learned about like baskets, and a little bit of history, but not told from like our perspectives. At least like that was my experience in going to school on the res, was that, we did learn a lot of like US history, and that was like a requirement of us to like go on to the next grade. I also went to like a Catholic school on the res, so yeah, I had to go to like Bible school. And though in that particular school, there wasn't really like a place or like encouragement for us to learn our language or learn our history, or even to just like think about, why we're on the res, and like why that's the only place we should be. Yeah. And so the only times where I got the truth was among my family or like among friends, and just being like out in community. That's the only time where the adults or like elders would tell us the truth. So when we moved off reservation, so I went from, being in this strong sense of community and being able to like ask, my relatives for help, or if I was at school and needed a ride, I could just ask, one of my classmates, because I had been going to school with them since elementary, like I grew up with them. So now I'm like in this environment where it's majority settlers. I was only like one of 6 Native students in my school in Phoenix. And it was just like a total like switch from community to strangers, like communities to settlers. And in a lot of ways, like living in the border towns was very difficult in terms of, getting like healthcare, access to language, to education, and like in terms from like an Indigenous perspective, it was very hard to like find those like aspects of communities, or it was hard to find like aspects that make like a Native community like strong, So in a way, like living in the border towns was very isolating. And I think it also sort of like nourished my understanding of how do I say this? My understanding of like Native struggle being a class struggle, and that border towns are kind of like they're like a space for settlers, but it's also a space where like Native people and settlers like confront each other. And I think it also sort of like helped me realize like, whoa, like, and I guess, I don't know, I guess maybe to make it more like easier to understand through like a visual, but it's like, to me, like like, yes, it's our homelands. Well, not all reservations are like the homelands of like Native people, but in terms of like Diné people, Navajo Nation is like our homeland. But also like, it's like wherever you go, you're on Native land. And the way that I kind of have been like sort of unpacking it for myself, or like understanding it for myself, is that, like in Palestine, it's like kind of understood by, settlers that like, oh, Palestinians exist behind the wall, and like they're not allowed to go past the wall. And so for me, that's kind of like how reservations operate. It's like, oh, like natives exist on the reservation. They're not allowed to go beyond the reservation, which I think is like totally the wrong approach when you're studying like Indigenous politics, or like Indigenous people in general, because it's like we should be allowed to move wherever we want to, without having to like break down these like walls, whether they're like physical or like mental or like psychological, And so I think, yeah, and like my experience living, and I think that's why I choose to continue to live in the border towns, such as like Phoenix or even like Albuquerque, because like it's part of like land back, it's part of like making sure that our presence here is resisting all of these like all of these forms of settler colonialism, or like domination, or even just like pushing back on how settlers like view us, or how they treat us, how they respect us. And so I think, like being here in the border towns is kind of like in opposition to whatever like fantasy settlers have for themselves and their history. Because sometimes like walking in the border towns, it's like you get these looks from settlers where they just like don't know how to like perceive Native people, or it's just like, oh my gosh, like I don't know, I've had people who have come up to me and said that, you know, they thought we were dead, like they didn't know Native people existed. And so yeah, so I think for me, kind of just like pushing back on that notion that we only should be on the res, is just kind of like a way for me to just be like, I don't accept that. Like, you're on Native land, so yeah.
Can I just quickly, I want to say when you were sharing that, it was reminding me of, you know, a lot of times when talking about Palestine, the current colonial borders of Palestine, there's the West Bank, there's Gaza, and then there's Israel, or what we call 48. A lot of us call, you know, we'll say 48. And like sometimes you have conversations, they're like, oh yeah, as long as you get the West Bank and Gaza, like that's our end goal. And it's like, well, no, there's this whole territory that is Palestine, that is Palestinian. And so what you shared just was reminding me of that. Thanks for sharing
that. I mean, I don't know how to follow it up. Like, land back. Yeah, I got nothing.
Better, there's just not that many.
I want to encourage people
There's
to
just not that. But yeah,
their own questions in the chat at this time, and just keep an eye on time. We can start getting other questions. I have a couple of more, but I want to remind people, whether you're on Facebook or on Zoom, put some questions. I saw one question, I will get to it in the chat. I have, you know, maybe we can transition into what drives your solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. I know we've talked about similarities and your, you know, your trips there. So if you want to just expand on what is it that drives your solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, specifically politics, identity, and then some folks were also asking for resources. So what do you have new resources or things that have kind of been helpful for you for people interested in learning more about Indigenous communities in the US and how we can support and be in solidarity also?
And the love for Palestine is the same love like I have for my own people and for like my own liberation. I mean, y'all make like some of the coolest kind of just, you know, like what do you call them, like chants, like when you're out in the streets, like we're not free until Palestine is free, and gosh dang it, is it so true. I mean, I think, you know, what me and Kylie definitely experienced, like when we went onto our delegations to Palestine, is like understanding like there's people out there like actively resisting settler colonialism every day, and we do too here in the United States to like some extent, but seeing like our Palestinian relatives just like go hard every day, and like even like, you know, like when it seems like when I go on social media or like when I read the news, it's just like always something like these gosh dang Israelis are just like moving into villages or kicking out families or burning like another olive tree or just doing something every day. But it's like also like Palestinians are actively resisting that, no matter like how much tools are taken away from them, how much resources, how much water, you know, Palestinians are limited to, they're still creative and like find ways to resist. And like for me, as like an Indigenous person who is also like resisting settler colonialism, that is like, I don't even know the word. Like I feel like the word inspiring and just it like falls crazy short. Like I don't know if they're even, I can't think of like a word like strong enough to say right now, but knowing like just knowing like if I can just make our people go as hard here as they go in Palestine for our liberation and our freedom. Like that's going to benefit us both. It's going to benefit not just us both, but everyone here. And like that's the goal of like the Red Nation too, is like to inspire that hope. And I feel like during like a time like this, like I mean 2020, like for multiple weeks and like a huge part of like the height of like the pandemic. I know we're still in the pandemic, right? But like the height of that pandemic, the Navajo Nation was like at the top in the world for like death per capita from COVID. And like this is like the state that we're at. Like we're made disposable, and like it's just like that hopelessness, or like just constantly losing your people, and like constantly like losing your history, constantly losing your language. We're losing a lot. But to resist and to fight and to have that fire and say like, you know what, like, no, I will take up space. Like what Kylie just said, like we'll take up this space. Like I don't care. Like this is our land, or like this is Indigenous land. Like that is something like that just drives home for me. And it actually at point like saved my life. Like just knowing like we're not alone in this. Like there is no hope. Like there is hope. And it's like in the form of like Palestinian resistance, or it's in the form of like, all these other people's resistances. And like, that's how we'll win, is like together. And like, that is like my deep commitment. That is my deep love, because your win is my win. And like, I want to win here too, like, and like, I know like y'all will say, you'll look to us too. And like, we'll keep building, and like, they can't destroy us. If they can score 50 points at halftime, we can score 51 points in the next half, like why the heck not? But resources, I got a couple for you. I'll put them in the chat. Just like some basic ones, like ones like I always just like recommend people, like, like we just kind of want to know like what Indigenous liberation, or just like what the heck we're doing out here. Here it is. I'll put it in the chat.
Oh my gosh, thanks, Dee. Yeah, I'll let you handle the resources. But yeah, I think what drives I guess like what drives me to do this work is I guess like on a very basic like level, it's just like I think just like discovering your humanity, or at least like my love for humanity, and just like like I said in the beginning, like an uncompromising like commitment to truth and liberation for all like oppressed peoples. And I think, since I've been to Palestine and then have just been having these like continuing conversations with Palestinians, gosh, there's just so much hope, like I think in every conversation that I've had, there's always been like a strong sense of hope. Like it's never been void of it, so it's kind of I think, that like we recognize like these relationships will only move us forward and make us like stronger. And also just like what Dee had said too, like it's just like knowing that we're not alone, because it can be very isolating in the US. And then just, having to constantly like unpack, or just like constantly like remind ourselves that we are like worthy of respect, and we are like deserving of dignity, despite like what the US projects onto us. And so to have like to just reach out to others, outside of the US who are going through a similar struggle is just very like grounding, or it's just very hopeful. And I think, especially now, like, we're living in a very like tumultuous time where we all feel like, you know, we don't have time for certain things because of like the climate crisis, and, you know, but I think that, you know, despite all of that, we can't, like, we can't give up hope. We just can't. We just got to keep moving forward. And I think, yeah, studying the struggle of Palestine, like, it's definitely, I don't know. I'm sorry. All I keep saying is hopeful. That's the only word that keeps coming to mind. It's just like, yeah. And there's just so many things that we learn from each other. Like, Indigenous people in the US are, you know, 500 years deep. And so I think like having, like sharing knowledge with Palestinians, but also just like, I don't know how to say it. It's like, we kind of like build off of each other. And we sort of like, I feel like, you know, Indigenous people could tell you like what's coming ahead, you know, of like certain things that we've already been through. And we're just like, you know, look out for this. They're going to try this with you. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
No, it does. I mean, as you were saying that, I think I always say like our colonizers are speaking to and relying on each other, and like we need to, and we do speak to and rely on each other for those same reasons, like for actual like tangible advice and tools. And then also, and like, and I was getting emotional as you were talking, and I think that, you know, sometimes the words are hard because it's like it's a deeper emotional and like spiritual connection, I think, of this understanding of what we all are, you know, communities are working for and having to resist against constantly, but still being here. Like, it's hard, and like sometimes you feel defeated. And I know personally, like a lot of people at Pact 2 just feel very like, you know, like what's the point, right? Like they're so, the power feels too great. But then we have conversations like this, and we're reminded of the sharing of tactics and feelings, and it gives hope. Like you said, like that is the word, just we have to keep that going, and love for each other and for our communities, and like everyone's liberation is tied. Yeah, I can't think of a better way. I don't want to end, but I don't see any other questions in the chat. I see a lot of thank yous. I see a lot of shared feelings in the chat. I saw Nadia just got off, but it was great kind of just reconnecting with, you know, meeting you all and then reconnecting with some people. We just got, there's a question I'm going to ask. I want to, you know, give everyone a space to put some questions in the chat if you have it before we log off. So the question is, in my family, I've always observed a fatalist mentality heavily influenced by Islamic doctrine. Do people in your tribe share that? Were you taught as children that your entire lives were already determined and that the ink of your stories dried a long time ago?
Well, personally speaking, and like this comes from like, yeah, this is like from my family. There is like that fatalist mentality, or like, you know, like there's no hope, like, you know what, like we and speaking for like the net, like, you know, my grandpa was like kind of like a consultant or like an advisor, like someone that the people who set up the Navajo government, our council, like how we know it now, they came to him and said, like, this is how we're thinking of setting up our government. Do you, like, what do you think? And he's just like, heck no, like, why? Like, we've never had like a government like this. So like, why are you, like, you know, like you're negotiating like our land for like these white people. Like, what is the purpose of this government? Is it for our people? He had no answer. And like they still went, I mean, even without my grandpa's like approval or like, you know, listening to him, they still went ahead with this government. And like that's the government that we have today. Like, and it's, I mean, as we've shared, it's really whack. Not only they're like pro-Zionist, or like there's like no like accountability, but also like they do negotiate away like our land rights, our water rights, and they're just very reliant on federal money. And like, that's just the truth. And that's just something my grandpa observed and he passed down to my dad and said, like, yeah, just do what you want. Like, we're gonna lose our language, we're gonna lose our land, we're gonna lose everything, whatever. And then that's kind of like, my dad resisted that to a point, but then it's just like our generation, right? It's just like, no, fuck that. Like, we're coming back strong. Like, we're here, and like, I'm just saying, like, there is like that fatalist mentality. Like, I get it. Like that Kool-Aid is strong, but also like, you see these guns, you see this is stronger, like it's like you refuse to do that. And like, that's like the spirit that Red Nation has, is like, we refuse to like lie down. Like, we refuse to let like settlers or like settlers determine like what we are and like what we do and like what our fate is determined as. They tried to eliminate us. Like, we are the Indian problem. We still are, because we're advocating for land back. We're protecting the world. We're protecting water for everyone. We're protecting all these things. And like, it's not just we're doing this for like us, like as Indigenous people, or like we're just doing it for like our own nations. We're doing it for literally everyone in life on this planet. Like, that is, I mean, I always reference Lord of the Rings, right? Like it's like the battle for Middle Earth, or like we're trying to destroy this ring, or like you're putting together like a ragtag team of people to like do like this epic quest to save the world. Well, guess what? We're already writing that story. We're in the thick of it, boys. Like, this is where we're at, whether we like it or not. I've already taken my first step like outside the farthest I've ever been from the Shire. Like, that was a long time ago, and like, now we're here. And like, there's only one way to go. Like, it's literally destroying the ring. And I like, that's what I dedicate my life to. I know, even though my family was fatalistic, or I, had that mentality, I know other Indigenous people that did not have that. And like I said, like, that's why like we have land back now. Like, that's why we have the histories that we have now, like the ones that are intact, or these stories of resistance, or all of that came from people that refused and that were brave. And you know what? I'll make that choice too. I'll be brave, even though I don't want to, or sometimes I wish I didn't have to, but if it helps us, if it helps our future, if it helps everyone, then why not? I love y'all. I love this planet. I love life. I love my comrades. I love the Red Nation. I love, I just want the future generations to have hope too. And that's why we do this work.
Thank you. That was a beautiful answer. And I have so much to say. I feel like there's never enough, but I'm going to transition to the next question, because I think it ties to some of what you were saying. And I want to actually I want to add a little bit to this question, if that's okay. Because what, Kylie, when you're talking about, some of the comments you got about being from settlers, I remembered I was one of my grad school professors. We were talking about indigeneity, we were talking about Indigenous communities here, and just very literally was like, well, it's kind of too late for that, right? And just like completely like brushed it aside. And I think the audacity, I saw that word in the chat, right? Like, it really is. And so going off of that and adding, so Palestinian context, but also Indigenous communities in the US, how can we hold space and support Palestinian community? And I want to add Indigenous communities also, when we're restricted and censored by Zionist pushback, or by this brainwashing US, propaganda of, you can't talk about that or else you're not patriotic, and all of that stuff. And this person, Annabelle, asked this question: speaking from a high school student leadership perspective, we want to do what we can for Palestinian families in our community, but we can't talk about Palestine directly because Zionist community members cried anti-Semitism to admin. And then there was a question right after, and I think we can combine them in this like conversation about how to be an ally, although I don't like that word anymore, but maybe an accomplice. I know not all Israelis are against Palestine, just as not all Americans support colonialism. So how can we build better coalitions with allies?
Well, You know what? Two things. So on the anti-Semitism call out, there's a Palestinian organization that we worked with. It's like I have like two hats, or like I walk two worlds, or however you want to call it. But I'm like with Red Nation. I'm with Red Nation, but also like on my job, like I'm with Indian Collective, which is like another. It's a Native nonprofit dedicated to defending, develop, and decolonizing for Indigenous communities. But we wrote this position paper. Land back is the right of return, and just asserting. I'm part of the land back team, like asserting like Indian Collective's like position on like supporting Palestinian people, and Palestinian communities. And as we're launching this paper, like, not everyone knows in Indian Collective, like how to talk about Palestine or what this position really means. And like for us, and I'm a land back organizer. One of our other land back organizers is Nadia Tanous, who's a Palestinian woman out there in the Bay Area. And I already know, like, she knows like everyone on this call, but we know, Red Nation knows. I knew like what was gonna come if you release like a position paper like supporting Palestine in like the US. Like you already know you're gonna get like the anti-Semitism, and everyone else in Indian Collective just didn't know, and like we wanted to protect them. And what we ended up doing was like kind of giving them like a cheat sheet, or like a one pager saying like, okay, so these are like, if you're called anti-Semitism, like anti-Semitist, like this is like your response. I think I still have that response, but also who really helped us with that? I mean, obviously Nadia, but also Adala Justice Project and Makan. And Makan is out there in, I think, London. They're another Palestinian organization, and they teach classes on like anti-Semitism. And yeah, hit them up. I'll try to find I'll try to find a link. And maybe like we can like I have a follow-up email and send all this like resources out. But Makan, they'll tell you what anti-Semitism is, and like it's kind of like a training or like a class. I think it's like more like a class, real quick. I think 30 minutes, but I already know people just throwing anti-Semitism out there, don't even know what it means. So the vibes.
If you can share that, I can definitely send a follow-up with all the links that are shared. Kylie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah. So Red Nation is a recipient of Honor Native Land Tax through Albuquerque, our Surge Show Up for Racial Justice Albuquerque chapter. And I can send this in the email too. But like in terms of like being like a better ally is like so Surge through the Honor Native Land Tax, they offer education resources. So it's basically like settlers educating settlers, so that Native people wouldn't have to take on that labor of just like constantly, and it's like emotional labor too, right? For us to constantly explain like the real history to settlers. So they offer training courses on how to like support or like vocalize support for Native people. And I think they also, you can calculate like your tax for the land that you live on and then just pay it. Yeah. Also too, I think like, let's see, how do I say this? I think on a basic level of like showing support, it's really good to kind of do that like internal work for yourself in like investigating, why it is that you don't know, certain aspects of Native history, or like, just kind of like investigate like why that is and how it came to be. Because I think there's like just so much propaganda that's out there about Native people, whether it's through the news, movies, just all these different variations of media, right? And so it's kind of hard not to develop like an anti-Indian like perspective, you know, especially in the US because it's so strong. And I think what I also want, you know, people to know is that one of the best ways to support Native people is to respect us when we say no, respect us when respect us when we choose not to perform indigeneity for you. And because I think, you know, sometimes when people come to our communities or when they approach a Native person, that's often what they expect us to do, is to share our cultural knowledge, share our spiritual knowledge. And so when a Native person says no, that should be the end of, of that conversation, you know? And I think it's also important to to not take up the position to be the voice of Native people. And so just learning to step back is like, you know, one of the basic like forms that you can support Native people, and to just let us be. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that was a great answer that I also resonated with a lot. And I want to just end and thank you all so much for taking time to share your knowledge and, you know, the resources that you and just some of the history that you shared with us also, and being, you know, sharing your vulnerability and feelings and emotions too, because that is not always easy, right? And that lies like also hard labor. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you both for that, and also for sharing some of the internal conversations and dialogues within the community, because that, I mean, like so much of the same, you know, Dimitris, when you were talking about some of the internal conversations, like of even what we want and who we work with and who we don't, like so much of that happens within Palestinian communities and organizing also. Yeah, so I wanted to share you for you know, allowing us to also hear some of those conversations, because sometimes you don't want to share them externally, and I 100% feel that. So really appreciate you both. I appreciate everyone's kind of comments and reactions and questions in the chat, and for being here and for taking the time to be in conversation with us. I can definitely send the resources that were shared and some more. And I want to just encourage everyone to be very, you know, the conversation doesn't end here, right? So to take a lot of what we talked about and what was shared and really try to put it into practice in our everyday lives, whether that's through the people we talk to, or you're an educator, or, you know, whatever space it is. And if anyone wants to have more of these conversations, please just send us an email, you know, send me an email, send Pack an email, and continue, so we can continue to learn together. So thank you all so much. Thank you again, Kylie and Dimitris. We really appreciate you all and all the work that you do. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a great night.
Bye everyone. Hagone.
Thank you, Pack, for the invitation.
Yeah.